Welcome to the Creating Responsible Companies podcast. Hi, I'm Barbara Anderson, and I'm joined with my co-host and business partner, Janet Craig. Today is the second in a two-part series where we are helping companies identify what they can do to respond to the coronavirus or COVID-19. Today's episode, we're going to talk about how companies can respond from a corporate social responsibility perspective. We'll share some resources, some examples of what companies are doing, and how this can be something that will eventually add value to your company, even in this time of crisis. So we welcome you today to our webinar called Coronavirus, Company Responses and Resources. Janet?
I think it is a good time to talk about things that you should ask yourself to prepare for crisis in any situation, or even how any unseen disaster can affect your company. And what we've put together is a nice set of questions that will help guide any conversation to for companies in order for them to respond to just about anything that comes their way.
That's right. So as we've shared in another episode, this is such a trying time for everyone. And our corporate social responsibility and business leaders are really on the front lines in terms of responding for their company, trying to do the right thing, trying to navigate this new environment, which very few were prepared for. And so as Janet and I looked and saw that people were struggling, we said there's got to be a way that we can help. And so this is our way to help, is to share some practical ways. We've got 5 different steps that companies can go through and take into consideration. And this is the second in what we called yesterday was the company's response. Today's episode will be a little bit more on what the company can do from a social perspective, what we call corporate social responsibility. This is in support of our podcast, Creating Responsible Companies, and we are being responsible ourselves, actually broadcasting from our homes using Zoom instead of our normal studio, right? So, so what we shared yesterday, and we'll have this available on our website at destinationbetter.com, are some resources that companies can use. We've got some tips here, some URLs for those who are just listening to the audio. Guidance for employers. We've got a corporate aid tracker. These are both resources provided by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and the U.S. Chamber Foundation. Ways that companies are responding, and we'll cite some of those today. Also, LinkedIn is doing a really great job of keeping up with what companies are doing, and in hopes that these, as we're all trying to figure this out, these might be resources that will help you or anyone in a role that's responsible for this to be able to figure out what to do. We have a page here for philanthropy's response. The organization Candid has a great running list of philanthropic ways that organizations are responding. And we'll share some examples of how some companies are partnering with nonprofit organizations who either have the skills or resources or can help them facilitate a response from a contribution perspective. And then our friends at visit.org are keeping a list of organizations and resources that people can tap into, where their business is typically to take people on volunteer vacations or to give back in an on-site way. They've shifted to do that. And then some links and resources here in terms of government assistance, small business administration, and also personal ways to tap in. So anything else on that, Janet?
I would just like to say that I think the list here is really amazing, and that as companies and, well, as people go through and take a look at some of the things on that list, don't forget to document. If you find someone who's done a really great job and you want to contact them afterwards to tap into what they've done, people in corporate social responsibility and just people in general during this time are going to be happy to share their ideas and resources. So document, bookmark, use the questions that we're going to give you today to kind of get your post response ready.
Yeah, I agree. This is something that could be used in the future for other types of disasters. So, what we covered in the previous episode, episode 13, is what companies should consider in their company's response. And so, we won't go into this now, but the 5 topics are how this has impacted your business and industry. Number 2 is what do the next 30, 60, 90 days look like for your organization, for your role, for what your company can do to respond. Third is what opportunities do we see during this time? We know that a lot of companies have had to shift their business model, and so perhaps it presents an opportunity to fill a new need. And then fourth is what do we need help with? We as business leaders often don't think about asking for help, but this is a time that you can actually foster relationships and make progress by asking for help and putting yourself out there. And then last, what have we learned that we can share with others that would help others? So it's a time where even on a day by day or even hour by hour situation right now, we are faced with trying to make decisions and trying to come up with how we can respond. And so this is one time that'd be great to share what you've learned and not keep that as proprietary information. So Janet, what else do you have on this before we jump into the company's CSR response?
I would just like to say that yesterday on our episode 13, we covered in a little bit deeper detail what is on the screen right now. So the 5 questions that Barbara just went over. And we also created an infographic for you that's available on our website so that you can use that as a guide.
Yep, so that'll be a handy little tool. And we'll have one for today that we'll share at the end, and it'll also be on our website at destinationbetter.com. So as Janet and I thought about what companies should consider in their CSR response, we again have 5 different ways. We want to make this meaty enough that it's going to be of value, but also something that you can process and put in a framework that hopefully you can take and use this as a resource. So number 1, when we think about who, and this is when we talk about corporate social responsibility, we talk about how the company can respond using both the company's assets and also anything philanthropic or financial resources. So we'll go through that. So when we think about how to respond, you've got, I would imagine people inside of companies have got information coming at them from all different angles, trying to determine what the best use of their time, their resources, their talents. And first is to think about who can we tap into help the cause. So think about the relationships that your organization or you or your leaders have developed over the years. Now is a good time to tap into those. Those are investments that can be leveraged, especially as we think about the speed of getting things done. We've got day by day lives being lost. What can be done to, who can you use maybe in the course of your process and thinking that can help to expedite? And number 2 is think across all of your stakeholders. And when Janet and I talk about stakeholders, we talk about anybody inside and outside of the company who is impacted as a result of your organization. So think about your supply chain. How are they being impacted? You're going to need them down the road. So is there a way that maybe you can do something now to help facilitate their success, or maybe even help them to stay in business? What about people on your board of directors? A lot of times those individuals have incredible relationships and connections and can get things done quickly. Often they say, you know, it's more of who you know than what you know. And then nonprofit relationships, the nonprofits who are out there who are on the day-to-day really on the front lines of serving people with addictions and with food challenges and paying their electric bills or their energy bills or water bills. Think of all across all of your stakeholders, your employees, your people in your community. And so who can not only maybe is in need, but who can you partner with to help get things done? So Janet?
One of the exercises that we use, I think that's really helpful, especially because not everyone looks at data like I do. And sometimes there are creative thinkers who like a more of a visual process. So one of the things that Barbara and I do when we work with our clients is we make an A circle, a B circle, and a C circle. So the A circle are your stakeholders that you have direct impact and connections with. That would be suppliers, employees. And then you think about your stakeholders that you have an indirect impact on. And then in the C circle are your stakeholders that you have that you influence. So if you look at them graphically, maybe just have a big poster board up somewhere that everybody can add things to, you'll start to see the relationships. And it's really helpful to do that so that you're not just thinking in your head, I've got this list of people that I need to talk to. Make an A circle, a B circle, and a C circle, and you'll start to see how those relationships and connections kind of cross over, and gives you a little bit better of an idea about how your company and your activities actually influence a much wider circle, and it may open up some ideas in your company and your team for other ways to partner.
Very good. So as we think about who, often too, companies will, when they don't have an answer for who in terms of how to respond philanthropically or how to help the cause, will contribute to like a consolidated effort. So there's one that's now called the Solidarity Relief Fund. And this, by the way, is being recorded on March 27th of 2020. So this is a large fund that the philosophy is that the company can contribute to it. People who are in the know, who are doing this day in and day out, will make the best decisions and use that money the most wisely. And when we think about our stakeholders, for example, Janet, many may or may not know, is a musician. So musicians are coming together with like a music relief fund. For example, Spotify contributed to that because their stakeholders are musicians who provide resources for them to be able to play their music and to broadcast that. So they're investing in that. And a lot of musicians with bars and restaurants closed are unfortunately not playing. Or
Well, they're doing some cool things though. There's some local restaurants where Barbara and I are based in St. Petersburg. And thank you for making a nod to our artistic community. I sure appreciate that. I miss rehearsing with my bandmates, that's for sure. But there is one particular, I believe it's Ruby's Elixir in downtown St. Pete, where our musicians can't get out and play right now, but you can go in there and play if you want. And I think that they're doing some live broadcasts, and there's some other ones that have done the same thing. And so what we're seeing is that musicians, we usually don't get to see each other because we're usually out playing. Now we're starting to get together and talk together and find different ways to collaborate through Zoom. Thank goodness for Zoom right now. But musicians can do it. We've also seen some other interesting ways that people are connecting with their stakeholders, and kind of bartenders that are doing mixing classes, and people that are doing food classes and food classes online and things like that. So we're still connecting with our stakeholders. We're just doing it in a little bit of a different way.
Yep. And I've seen some social media posts where restaurants, they're the ones that are often asked for gift certificates and that kind of thing for fundraisers. And let's not forget that they gave when others asked. And the last example that we'll share here is HEB, which is a large a grocer in the state of Texas. And they have partnered in their philanthropic response. If you think about trying to make an impact where you've got a location. So if their grocery stores are across the state of Texas, who they gave their funding to from a relief perspective is the Texas Biomedical Research Institute, who's working on solutions and vaccinations and that type of thing for COVID-19. So that makes sense, right, that they give. And you think about the employees who work for Texas Biomedical Research Institute are probably customers of theirs. So think about kind of this whole loop of fostering relationships. So that's the who of how companies should consider in their response. Second is what. So think about what inherent resources your company has that you can contribute. So each company has different assets. They have different things that they can give back. So for example, skills. What skills or what information do you have that maybe nobody else has? What skills can you lend to the cause? We talked a little bit about General Electric or GE and Ford partnering to collaborate on creating some ventilators. And so those are skills that both of those organizations had. Ford had the equipment, the place to manufacture them, and GE had the know-how of how to do it. And so they repurposed actually something in their car. The tangible business assets, so like products, machinery, facilities, in addition to the Ford and GE example. Ralph Lauren actually is producing 250,000 masks and 25,000 gowns. So they've got the sewing equipment and they've got the know-how of how to secure fabric and that type of thing in a really fast way. And that's a great need that we know now. Financial resources. We talked about that in terms of contributing maybe to a larger fund or just knowing where resources are needed the most. So a lot of companies are contributing now to people who maybe are food dependent. For example, General Mills, they channeled their money to food banks, and I would imagine they're also doing some in-kind type of thing. But in Grubhub, who's the delivery service, they're actually waiving fees for their independent restaurant customers. So that's a great way to give, for them to give back to their customers who they're going to need on the other side of this, to give them a break. And that's, I think, up to a certain dollar amount, $1 million or something like that. And then finally, in terms of what you can contribute, think about knowledge. So how to get things done, like intellectual property, which is oftentimes maybe the number one asset of a company, but how can you adjust that? And that's probably where the GE and Ford model came up with. And on the financial assets, what about matching employee gifts? We know employees who still have a good income want to give back and they want to do something but they don't know how. Maybe you have like an employee assistance fund that can help employees, and if they have losses related to COVID-19, maybe family members, or they need to travel for whatever reason, that's a great way. Some companies are increasing pay for frontline employees. Like for example, AT&T is giving a 20% bonus for employees who are still like in their stores and still servicing in homes and that type of thing. So there's a number of different ways that organizations can contribute. And one example, the last one I'll give in terms of like knowledge and assets, is Google, and think about the data and how they can reach people. So they have created an SOS alert to connect organizations with the World Health Organization information. So what media information, so that those organizations don't have to go out and pull it. Google's actually providing it for them. Janet?
I would just like to thank AT&T because one of my children works for AT&T in retail, and I know he's taking all the possible precautions that he can to keep himself safe and also keep the people that need their services up and running. So not out to them. And then just rounding out from a local perspective, and we touched a little bit about on this yesterday, is that we have, when we look at the impact on our food supply chain, which is just incredible when you go to the grocery stores, or you see for us in St. Pete, our restaurants are takeout only, which is happening a lot across the United States. And we still have farmers that are producing food. And so for the farmers that are producing food, normally that food would have gone to point A. Well, now we have to figure out how to get that food still to people, but in a little bit of a different way. So using existing infrastructure in restaurants, maybe to pull, clean produce and distribute it in a different way. So maybe restaurants become, fresh produce markets instead, if they're not selling all of that product inside their restaurant. So keeping our food supply chain going, keeping our economic resources going, and just finding different ways of doing things.
Yep. And talking about your son, my daughter actually is in the medical field, and my concern about her going in and out of hospitals and nursing homes. And so it's a tough time for people on the front lines. And it's interesting, the whole social impact of who people who were on the front line maybe were thought of differently than like executives of companies, and how now these people, the truckers, the hospital workers, are really who we're totally relying on at this point. So interesting, so from a social dynamic perspective. So the third part, we've talked about who and what you can contribute, and then think about when. So when should your organization respond, now or should it be later? And our philosophy is you should consider everything, short-term, mid-term, and long-term. There's going to be needs, they're going to change. They are almost changing by the day. If you think about now as almost like a triage kind of thing, kind of like the Ralph Lauren making gowns and masks, which we have people all over the country who have dusted off their sewing machines and are helping to make masks on that. From a short-term perspective, some examples are like Microsoft has donated software for hospitals to help them facilitate more rapid transfer of information. As we talked about, now food is a need in the short term. And then think about longer term, like what about rebuilding? What is that going to look like? And what can you do now that's going to help to facilitate that? But, you know, it's kind of like, what are the needs now? What are they going to be 30, 60 days? And then what longer term, both from your business and also from a social impact perspective, and as it relates to even to all of your stakeholders, right? Your employees, your customers. Janet?
Yeah, the only thing I have to add is keep that documentation going. I know that we're all in the middle of a crisis and it's hard to think straight sometimes, but document as much as you possibly can. And the reason that Barbara and I have done this and put these slides to get together is so that you can ask yourself these questions and write these notes down, because in a week, gosh, I don't remember what I did yesterday, you know, let alone a week from now or 60,
Sure.
90 days from now, or even if you have ideas that are, you know, innovative ideas that you, or practices that you've come up with during this time that you may want to keep repeating down the line. They tend to be problem solving kind of ideas that maybe will help facilitate relationships and new lines of businesses and ways to help people. So just document as much as you can, and having this open lines of communication with your stakeholders.
Yeah, and oftentimes we look back and we're like, why'd we do that? So you kind of have to you have to write it down to remember. So number 4 is where. So which of our locations need the most support? When you think about where should you donate product, where should you donate financial resources? And this is a tricky one, and it can be very sensitive too, especially if you think about after like a hurricane, maybe one hurricane, if you have a location in a country or a city where there's a hurricane, and then there's 2 months later there's a flood, but you gave a certain dollar amount to one versus to the other, and what does that mean? Does that mean you need, you know, you think of one higher than the other? So think about location specific needs, and a lot of times it's easy just to say we're going to do this for all of our locations, or where we have offices, or where we have service centers, or whatever. But they might have different needs. And so this is a time, it takes more time, but think about how maybe you can put a team together to to reach out to each of those different locations and see what their needs are. Oftentimes we give solutions for something that they don't need at a specific location, and resources we know are right now are quite premium. For example, Amazon, in addition to providing $1 million in masks and gloves, they actually have put out a fund for $1 million for small businesses in their Seattle location, which is where they're headquartered. Next door, when you think about location, I think this is so clever. They've come up with kind of a matchmaking, if you will. It's called the Help Map. And so people who need help can post on there. So maybe it's a senior citizen that needs their lawn mowed, or something, a pipe broke, or who knows. And then there's groups. And so you can sign up to say, I would like to help. I'm staying at home, I'm a plumber, or I am a college student. I can run and get your medication or whatever. So I think when we think about where that's just such a great example for next door. And then last, Coca-Cola in the Philippines have chosen to redirect what they had originally tagged $3 million in advertising to people on the front lines and to support those needs. And we've got colleagues, very dear colleagues in the Philippines. And so that was kind of near and dear to my heart to see what Coca-Cola was doing there.
I would also say that if you haven't yet leaned on your local chamber, this is a really great time to do it. I think a lot of people think that chambers of commerce are for, I don't know, big companies, or maybe they're only for small companies. But the chamber is one of the places in your community and in communities that you operate in that are tied to the entire community. They're like the spoke in the wheel, or I guess the hub, right? The
Mm-hmm.
hub. And so, yeah, not so much. So the hub. And so for our local chamber here, our St. Pete Area Chamber of Commerce has done an amazing job in responding to this, bringing people together, having, emails and getting groups of people together in related industries and putting those groups together so they can talk their way through this and share best practices, and know that maybe 6 months from now we can go back and say what worked and what didn't work. So I think don't overlook your local chambers of commerce. I know Barbara and I have a link for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. A lot of your local chambers are also part of the U.S. Chamber. So I know that there's going to be a lot of attention on this, but don't forget that they are there and to join them and get kind of connected with your local community. Even if your headquarters is in New York and you've got operations all over the US, get someone who's in those locations to tap into their local chamber and see what else they can do there.
Yep. And maybe even the chamber needs help too, right? Because their whole model has changed now. We've even actually participated already in one of their online classes that they were going to have in person. And we probably wouldn't have been able to do it in person. And so it was one about marketing that we actually tapped into. So the last one here, so we've gone through who, what, when, where, and I guess that everybody can guess what the last one is why. So why should companies create a response from a corporate social responsibility perspective? Gosh, there's so much value here, and we almost feel a little guilty saying that there's something good can come from this, but it is a fact of the matter. It's a huge opportunity to foster relationships, maybe put ourselves out a little bit more than we might normally, take some risks in trying to collaborate with people in our competitive space, in our supply chain. But it's a great way to foster relationships with employees, suppliers, customers. And this will be remembered for a long time. We talked a little bit about the employee bonuses and maybe an hourly increase for some who are on the front lines. That will go a long way. Another reason is to elevate your brand and your reputation. This is a fragile, delicate time. Nobody knows how long it's going to last, what's going to look like on the other side. But there's nothing better. And Janet, we've cited in our previous episodes, what is it, the study that like 51 or 52% of a company's value? What is it? What is the
Yeah,
source?
it's a report that EY did that showed that I think 51 to 52% of the value of a company is actually held in its culture, and that in what there are a lot of things that play into that culture: leadership style, management styles inside your company, how people feel good about what they're doing, that they're part of something bigger, and also the kind of policies and practices and procedures that come under the G in environmental, social, and governance, the G in governance. All of those things come up underneath that. And when you develop a culture that matches, people just inherently needing to be really good human beings, it is just better for your brand, it's better for your company, and it will help you weather the storm.
And we often say that companies are comprised of people, and as much as we want to think about our competitive nature and what we need to do to meet our bottom line, at the end of the day, we are all people. So how can we help each other out in this time and perhaps come out with something, a whole new different product, service, collaboration? And then the last two would be, in terms of why, is to be a hero in your industry. Can you bring maybe people from your industry together to brainstorm who has what assets to help? Like the cruise line, right? They've opened up their ships to become floating medical hospitals. And that's, I think, across a large part of the cruise line industry. And then last, and we've talked about what's the curve that we're trying to flatten the curve, right? We're trying to flatten the curve as humans, and flatten the curve, that means not to have the number of cases and the number of deaths spike, but to try to flatten that out. So maybe think about the opposite of this, is to flatten the dip for your company. So it's going to be a dip. We know that every company is probably going to face that, except maybe the handful who are in the medical industry or healthcare. But a lot of companies are facing some tough times. And so how can you flatten that dip for your company? And we've got episodes, and Janet would be happy to share with you any kind of information in terms of companies who have stronger environment, social, and governance, or CSR strategies that's integrated with their business, how they've gone through tough times, and actually their dip was not as deep as the general market.
That's right. And one of the things that Barbara and I talk a lot about in our practice is using corporate social responsibility as a competitive differentiator. And she and I talked at length yesterday that this is not the time to use this for competitive differentiation. This is a time to find other people in your industry, to break down those competitive walls and actually like foster those relationships to come together. So that's one thing I'd like to say about that, is that now's not the time for competitiveness. Now is the time to get together and figure out how we're going to face this situation together. And the other thing about flattening the dip for my company is that I think that for companies that are going through this right now, and you're going to survive and you're going to come out of this on the other end, when we do have another event, whether it be a pandemic, it could be a major hurricane event, it could be a huge weather event, something that is going to knock the breath out of your business, that you will be able to flatten the dip for your company as long as you are prepared. That's why we put together a lot of these questions, for the same kind of questions that we use for some of our larger clients, to prepare them for things that just they may not see, or things that are rare occurrences, but at least we can get them prepared and create that culture of preparedness and responsibility.
And to that point, anyone listening who is kind of at a loss, or maybe would like some input or counsel or advice, just please reach out to us on our website at destinationbetter.com. There's a tab called Say Hello. We also have a dedicated, where on the Say Hello page, it has phone numbers, email, and also a way to leave a voice message. We also have a dedicated page on our website at destinationbetter.com with these resources. We also are going to be publishing, as Janet mentioned at the beginning, an infographic, which you can download, which might be helpful as you think about going through these steps. So we have an infographic for this episode today on creating your CSR response, and then the one yesterday was focused more like kind of on a holistic company response. And if anybody wants to talk about this, we'd be happy to talk with you. We're looking at future episodes, and it could be something that's confidential, or it could be something on a podcast if you wanted to tell your story, especially if you've learned something along the way that might help others. We would love to have you share that. It might be a forum for you that we can offer as part of our assets and what we can do to help. So we do hope this was valuable for you. As we said, the resources, the downloads, these links are on our website at destinationbetter.com. Anything else to close us out there, Janet?
No, other than just keep the lines of communication open, keep sharing with us, ask questions, go to the Say Hello tab. Please consider coming onto our podcast. We'd love to share your story and have you as a guest. And That's it.
Yep. We hope everyone remains healthy and safe. And please contact us if you have any questions about this information. We're happy to share. Okay. Thank you for joining us today.